I just came back from a haunted house. I will never forget my experience. I've always loved Halloween. The creepy decorations, the thrill of scary movies, and, most of all, haunted houses. I've been to them all, corny ones with actors who pop out from behind walls, the big-budget haunted theme parks, even a few of the extreme ones where you have to sign a waiver. So when I heard about the Hollow Manor, a supposedly real haunted house that only opens its doors for 3 days every October, I knew I had to go. The rumors alone were enough to make me eager. People said the place had a history of strange happenings, and every Halloween, it reopened, allowing a select number of people to enter. Each year, tickets sold out within hours, and the few who managed to get in either left without a word, or in some cases, didn't leave at all. I managed to snag a ticket through a friend who worked in promotions. When I picked it up, she looked at me with a strange expression. "Are you sure about this, Kyle?" she asked. "This one, it's different." I shrugged it off. "I've been through tons of these things. What's the worst that could happen?" She hesitated, then handed me the ticket and whispered, "Just don't go alone." The night of the tour, I arrived a little before midnight. The house was an old Victorian mansion that looked like something out of a horror movie. Tall, with darkened windows and ivy crawling up the stone walls. The air around it was eerily still, and a thick fog seemed to cling to the ground, making the place look even more foreboding. They split us into small groups of 4. My group was a mismatched crew, 2 college girls who looked like they were rethinking their life choices, and an older man who kept nervously checking his watch. We barely introduced ourselves before the doors opened with a loud creak, and the staff ushered us inside. The first room was dark, lit only by flickering candles that cast long, eerie shadows over the walls. The guide, a tall man in a tattered suit with hollow eyes and a haunting voice, began to speak. "Welcome to the Hollow Manor. Tonight, you will walk the same path as those who came before, and perhaps meet the same fate." The girls laughed nervously, but something about his tone was different. He didn't sound like an actor playing a role. He sounded genuine. "Follow closely," he said, and turned to lead us down a narrow hallway lined with old, cracked mirrors. As we passed each mirror, I thought I saw something moving in the glass, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there but my own reflection. The guide led us into a dimly lit sitting room with ancient furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. He gestured for us to sit, and we each took a seat, uncomfortable and stiff. Each year, guests come to the Hollow Manor to seek thrills, but in this house, thrills come at a price. "The spirits within do not like to be disturbed," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "They watch you, test you, and if they deem you unworthy, they may keep you here." The older man laughed nervously. "Okay, nice touch," he muttered. "So, what now?" The guide didn't respond. He simply walked out of the room, leaving us alone in the silence. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud. We sat there for a while, exchanging glances. I was trying to figure out if this was all part of the act when suddenly, one of the girls gasped. She pointed to the corner of the room where a shadow was beginning to take shape. It was faint at first, almost blending into the darkness, but as we watched, it grew darker, solidifying into a figure. It was a woman, dressed in a long, torn gown, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She moved slowly, almost gliding, as she crossed the room toward us. My heart raced, and I could feel the others tense beside me. What is that?" the older man whispered, his voice shaking. The figure stopped a few feet from us, her empty eyes staring into the distance. Then she opened her mouth, and an eerie, guttural sound filled the room. A mixture of a moan and a scream that sent chills down my spine. Without warning, the lights flickered and went out completely, plunging us into total darkness. I heard someone gasp, and I reached out, feeling for the others. My hand brushed someone's shoulder, and then silence. Not just quiet, I mean absolute silence. No breathing, no shuffling, no whispers. Just nothing. When the lights came back on, the 2 girls were gone. Only the older man and I remained, sitting in stunned silence. The figure of the woman had disappeared, and the door was now slightly ajar. We got up, exchanging panicked looks. Where did they go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head, his face pale. They were right here." We both moved toward the door, stepping cautiously into the hallway. It was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was colder, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible whispering, like voices coming from far away. We began to walk down the hall, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. Every so often, I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow, the glint of eyes watching us from the darkened corners. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. We reached a large staircase leading down into the basement. A cold draft rose up from below, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something that made my stomach twist. "We should go back," the man whispered, his voice barely audible. But before I could respond, a soft, ghostly voice echoed from below. "Help us." It sounded like one of the girls. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man nodded, and despite every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I started down the stairs. The basement was cold and damp, the walls lined with old, moldy stones. A single, flickering light hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow over the room. As we reached the bottom, I noticed the floor was covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room stood an old, wooden door with heavy iron hinges. The whispering was louder now, coming from beyond the door, mingling with faint scratching sounds, like fingernails dragging across wood. I looked at the man, and he shook his head, mouthing, "Don't." But I couldn't stop myself. Something was pulling me toward that door, an inexplicable compulsion that overpowered my fear. I reached out, my hand trembling, and turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow room filled with tall, dusty mirrors, each one cracked and covered in grime. But in the reflections, there they were. The two girls, standing in the mirrors, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. They were pounding on the glass, screaming silently, their mouths forming words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, horrified. They're trapped," I whispered. The man shook his head, his face ashen. We have to get out of here." But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. I rushed toward it, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, and I turned to see the reflections in the mirrors shifting. The girls were gone, replaced by shadowy figures with hollow, empty eyes that stared at us, unblinking. The figures began to move, stepping out of the mirrors, their forms twisting and stretching as they approached. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding as they came closer. Their faces twisted into expressions of anger and sorrow. "We shouldn't be here," the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the whispering voices. One of the figures reached out, its hand cold and solid as it touched my arm. I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that seemed to seep into my bones. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I saw images. Flashes of people trapped in darkness, their faces twisted in fear. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe, and when I opened them again, the figures were gone. The door stood open, and the basement was empty. We didn't say a word as we stumbled out of the house, running through the fog and into the night. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Now, I'm home, but I can still feel them. Those eyes watching me from every shadow, every reflection. The Hollow Manor isn't just a haunted house. It's a prison, a place that feeds on fear, trapping those who get too close. I don't know what happened to those girls or what I saw in those mirrors, but I'll never forget that feeling. The cold, inescapable presence of something ancient, something that doesn't want to be disturbed. And I know, deep down, that I'll never be free of it. The Hollow Manor gave me more than just a scare. It left a mark on me, something I can't see but feel, as though a part of me is still trapped within those walls, watching from the darkness. And now, every night, I see eyes in every reflection, waiting.